Today's episode of Hansel Minutes is sponsored by Datadog. With infrastructure monitoring, distributed tracing, and logs, Datadog provides end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. Datadog's distributed tracing and APM generates detailed flame graphs from real requests, enabling you to visualize how requests propagate through your distributed infrastructure. You can see which services or calls are generating errors or contributing to overall latency, and dive deeper into your production code with an always-on code profiler to pinpoint the root cause and optimize your application faster at no additional overhead, regardless of your scale. Start monitoring your applications with a free trial. datadoghq.com/HanselMinutes. That's datadoghq.com/HanselMinutes. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Lisette Sutherland. She's an author, a speaker, and a facilitator who's got a great book out right now called Work Together Anywhere. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, I must admit. The pandemic is getting to me too.
Isn't it funny how are you is a loaded thing now? It's like I've been actually answering how are you with, well, how is anyone today really? Like how are we? Because you could just say, oh, I'm great. How are you? But that you wouldn't really mean it.
Exactly. It seems like a fake response. And why be fake right now? It's we're suffering. We're in a pandemic, and I feel it too.
But if I said, well, I'm soul crushingly, down about the pandemic, then it's like, well, I just wanted to talk to you about that email or whatever.
Right. No, I'm hopeful and struggling during a pandemic. I'll say that.
Yeah. But you have created a book that came out in June of last year, which is surprisingly well timed. Was the pandemic raging while you were working on the book, or did this just happen to come together because you had an expertise in the space?
Actually, I self-published the book in September of 2018.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. And when the pandemic struck, Wiley contacted me and said, we need your book on the market right now. Would you like to publish with us? And I didn't hesitate. I was like, heck yeah. So they republished the book in its entirety in June of this year.
Well, it is a big book. A lot of people have been pushing out remote worker books, frankly, that are pamphlets. Let's just be realistic. We won't name any names, but there have been some remote worker pamphlets. This is quite extensive, and a non-trivial amount of work has been put into this. And I have to say, I appreciate books that have huge appendices and terms, everything called out, and references. This is one of those books, as opposed to the someone rants for 100 pages.
I very much appreciate that you noticed that, because the book took 5 years to write. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I am eternally grateful to my co-author, and actually who is my editor on the book is Kirsten Janine Nelson. We were friends in San Francisco when I was in my 20s, and I asked her to help me with the book when I started because I realized it was just beyond me. And I couldn't have done it without her. But I really appreciate you noticing. It was a real project.
Yeah, there is. I have written a number of books, and I have written ones that are, I just ranted and slapped the keyboard, and I've written ones that involve research and interviews and appendices, and there is a very, very different flavor and a taste to each of those kind of books. And I want folks that listen to the show to understand that this is a book that has a lot of depth, and it also has an associated online workshop, a 4-part workshop that can build upon the things that you'll learn in the book. So I would encourage people to check that out. And of course, they can check it out at lisettesutherland.com and get links to the book and the workshop and all that kind of stuff.
Indeed. It's all online. And I have to say that I'm really proud because the book and the workshop were co-created. So actually, when you take the workshop, if you take it from me, then you get a book at the end, because it is actually like a handbook of the workshop in the end. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on how you like to take your media.
Now, I called out on a blog post early on that I felt that remote work and quarantine work are different things. And people probably did the same to you, where we all started working remote. They called their friend that knows about remote work, and they go, hey, you've done this before. Give me some tips. And I'm like, well, let's talk about the first tip. This isn't like forced remote work isn't quite the same as like the joy of remote work.
Totally, totally. In fact, it's entirely different. Years ago, when I was helping businesses go remote, one of the biggest things I told them was transition slowly. Like don't just go remote overnight, maybe do one day a week or even an afternoon a week, because going remote is going to change your culture. And then 2020 hit and we all went remote overnight. And it was a huge culture change for people. And of course, the stress of lockdown, of our kids are at home with online learning, and it's another beast in its entirety. And this is not remote work.
Mm-hmm. So there's a section in the book called Convincing Your Boss, and that would have made a lot of sense a couple of years ago if I had that tool, because I was the only remote worker on a team that was all in Seattle while I'm down here in Portland. Even though we've all gone remote by mandate, by fiat, it's funny that convincing your boss that it's a good idea still is kind of a thing, because some of the bosses haven't really bought off on this.
I feel like they think the pandemic is going to end soon, or everybody had hoped that this would sort of blow over quickly. And a lot of bosses, I think, were just saying like, yeah, we'll just get through this. And after this, you're coming back to the office. And I think a lot of people are still in that camp. But I think a lot of companies are going to be surprised after the pandemic, because the polls that I'm doing with remote workers around the world say that about 80 to 90% of people don't want to go back to the office full time, even when it's safe to do so. Most people want some sort of a hybrid style of working. And I think actually in the end, what people really want is the freedom to choose when and where they're most productive. And sometimes that's at the office. My husband hates working at home. He hates it with a passion. And when the offices in the Netherlands opened up here, he was the first one back. And I just think, the future of work is choice, both for the individual and for the company.
Interesting. So the future of work is choice is a very different statement than the future of work is remote.
Yeah, because I don't think that remote is for everybody. It's not for every person, and it's definitely not for every company. And so I just feel that Netflix is famously wanting to bring people back to the office after the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of people that want to work at Netflix and want to work in an office, and that should be available to them too. I respect the decision. It's the best thing for their company, I'm assuming. So it wouldn't be my choice, but yeah, I feel that the company should really be able to decide how remote they want to be.
Mm-hmm. There is a quote in the book from Megan Bureau that says, my role as a virtual team member, I need to be self-motivated, focused, curious, flexible, and collaborative. Certainly, an employee should be those things all the time, whether they're remote or not. But do you think that there's more pressure when you're alone in a room in your home or your small office, or we even have a coworker who's in their pantry in their kitchen and made a little office in the pantry. There's pressure to be more focused. It's easy to get distracted when you're just at home.
Oh, yeah. And, one of the things that I found for myself that I think people might be able to relate to is I found that I have a lot of motivation and not a lot of self-discipline. And so even as a professional remote worker. And so I really had to actually think about what systems could I put in place for myself that would help me have self-discipline. So I think that, it's super hard for people who have just started and may not have the skills, and you have to have the self-discipline, the motivation, the proactivity, all of that stuff on top of it. It's a bit overwhelming, I can imagine.
It seems like you feel that calling those things out and bringing those things out into the open is the first step for being a successful remote worker. Like if we simply go home and try to do office work in our spare bedrooms, we're fooling ourselves, and we need to say it out loud. Like, I have all the motivation in the world. I have very little self-discipline. Even though that feels like a failing, I'm hearing you and I'm seeing in the book that you think we should have those conversations.
I think it helps us relate to and connect with our teammates better when we know what each other are going through. And we can't know any of that unless we make it explicit, right? Unless we say it out loud, because we're remote. So we're sort of out of sight, out of mind. Nobody's really thinking about it. So I'm a big fan. I realize that it takes a certain amount of psychological safety on a team in order to be able to do that. So that would be the place to start. If you don't have that, you're certainly not going to open up about how you're struggling or how you may lack self-discipline. even though it could just take a couple of tips from a colleague that helps you.
The psychological safety one is an interesting thing. So you're saying that if you have, let's just be frank, kind of a crappy team now, it's just going to be a crappy remote team. There's nothing about going remote that's going to make it better.
Oh, right. And right. In fact, I think it's maybe even crappier. It might be amplified when you're remote because the stuff that you could maybe work out with glances or, just by, patting somebody on the back and saying like, sorry about that, or I didn't realize you were upset, or all of that goes out the window.
When we go back to half and half or hybrid, or I guess we don't even know what we're going to go back to. Do you think that folks will fall back into their hiring local first? I feel personally, and this is speaking only as myself, that Microsoft tends to really want people to move to Seattle. And I feel like we've missed out on some talent by not, being more flexible on with remote folks. It feels like we're going to need to formally commit to remoteness as an option. Do you see that other companies are ready to make that kind of a commitment whenever things go back to normal?
I think that what people are seeing now is that the idea of being remote first, of having the systems and processes in place to be able to go remote, is will only make your business stronger. So you may not be 100% remote, or you may only allow people 1 day a week. But if you have the systems in place to be able to go remote, your business will be less vulnerable and just general overall stronger for it. I mean, if you can think of scenarios like bad weather or transportation strikes or sick children at home, all kinds of reasons that will prevent you from getting to the office. And if you just have those systems in place where people can work from anywhere, your business will just be stronger for it. And I think, we've seen this during the pandemic. It's sort of been the companies that are surviving are the ones that are able to go online. I just see it. This is a really extreme example of what companies can expect in the future from much less extreme things happening.
I think that naively, I thought when we said remote first, it was one of those terms. It literally meant, well, people are remote first, and then they have the option of going back into the office. But I think you just expressed it in a much clearer way. You're not really saying remote first. It's almost like if you remember when people were starting to browse on their mobile devices and they said, well, you should do mobile first when you make your website. And that was a way of ensuring that we didn't forget about mobile. It didn't say don't make the desktop version of the website good. It just said start thinking about mobile first and then move to the desktop. So you're saying make sure that the people, the processes, and the tools support the remote worker fully, and then we'll talk about the on-site worker and make sure that they're successful. And in doing that in that order, we make everyone successful.
Well, yeah, because I think that the systems and processes that you have to have in place in order to make remote successful will only enhance your in-person interactions in the end.
Now, you have a section where you talk about the tools that you recommend, and you get a little bit into the basic tech tool set. You talk about minimizing background noise and embracing video. And you talk about the importance, and you have some actual quotes and science to back it up about nonverbal communication being a big part of our interaction. But I have noticed that a lot of folks don't feel comfortable being on video. And some folks with a certain amount of privilege, like myself, have been able to go and get good lighting, and I can be camera ready first thing in the morning, while other folks will just simply not turn their cameras on. Do you think that that's a big deal or not?
I think if your team is suffering from a lack of camaraderie or trust, then one of the easiest things you can do to build team and to create trust is to turn your video on so you can see each other and just see the emotions. So I would say, I'll start out by saying I'm a huge proponent of video. I think that it's an important part of team building and just being on a team is to be able to see each other and just see the body language that you can. However, I do recognize that some people don't like it. And there's lots of alternatives. There's lots of middle ground. I mean, maybe you could turn the video on for the first few minutes of the meeting just to say hello. And then the person turns the video off and maybe back on again to say goodbye. Even that is better than no video at all. But also, one of the things to keep in mind is we're spending way too much time in online meetings these days, and just way too much time in 2D in general. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging people to do is, like, if you have a one-on-one meeting, consider taking a walking meeting together. Go for a walk instead of sitting at the screen staring at each other. If you don't have anything that you need to screen share with, or, if you're just talking, maybe a walking video would be good. And I do think that the video is exhausting. So in general, if you're suffering from trust and you need more team building, video is going to be like an easy, low-hanging fruit solution for that. If it's a team that you know really, really well and the video is not that important, I would say don't stress about it too much.
I think that's a good balance, and I really like that idea of formalizing the walking meeting. We've also found at our company that when that comes from the top, when that's normalized from the top, when our VP takes a walking meeting, or our VP, as in our last couple of shows, brings her daughter into a meeting, and she sits quietly and everything's fine. It is a reminder that we're all human, and it normalizes it and tells us that it's like, okay, it is cool to have a walking meeting if it's not a formal presentation or some kind of quarterly, big deal meeting. A stand-up can certainly be standing up.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we need to get a little bit more creative about how we're having our meetings also, just because people are burning out because we're spending too much time in synchronous conversations with each other, I think. Or, it's sort of the total buildup of 2D though. So we're spending a lot of times in meetings, but then after our meetings, we're on Twitter or checking email or watching Netflix and YouTube. And that amount of time in 2D is actually having a negative effect on our mental health. So I think just getting creative about how we behave during the day and taking more time away from the screen where we can is sort of it's just a smart thing to do.
Have you ever wondered if you can be offering a faster, less buggy application experience for your customers? With Raygun Application Performance Monitoring, you have all the information you need at your fingertips to find and fix errors and performance problems across your tech stack down to the line of code. Raygun makes it easy to monitor the impact of your performance improvements, quickly identify and resolve issues, and see how your code performs in the hands of your customers, saving you time, money, and sanity. I've personally used Raygun on my iOS apps, and when a user hits a crash, those crashes get centralized into one location, they get bucketed automatically. I'll get a call stack and an email with a line number where things were crashing. It felt to me that I got a gift from my customer in the form of a bug report that I could actually solve. Head over to raygun.com and try it out for yourself. That's RAYGUN.com for a free 14-day trial. You touch a little bit on some of the bad things that we can do as remotes. No one's keeping me from watching Netflix or messing around. That kind of brings up the point of what the top remote worker traits are. There are certain personality traits or worker style traits. Does that mean that the skill set, I don't usually like to use the term soft skills, but the human skills skill set for a remote worker who's going to be more successful has changed versus someone who's in the office traditionally?
Well, I think the way that we connect with each other changes when we're remote rather than being in the office. So, we have different ways of showing appreciation and different ways of giving feedback. So I wouldn't say that you need to have more EQ as a remote worker. I think we just need to we have to connect in different ways.
You do call out the importance of the mindset of the remote worker being one of being results oriented. And I think the same thing applies from a leader perspective. Like, I don't really care when you work, whether it's 2 a.m. or whatever works for you in your life situation. If you're reliable, you're results oriented and somewhat responsive when I need to get a hold of you without feeling like you need to carry the pager, then that's a good, positive, proactive mindset.
Totally. And in fact, I always say that trust on remote teams is built by reliability, consistency, and the quality of work delivered and responsiveness. Can I find you if I need to? So those are sort of my 3 building blocks of trust. Or I just say, like, if you focus in these areas, you'll increase the likelihood of building trust. And then I would add to that likability. I interviewed Dr. Clue's treasure hunts, who does virtual and in-person treasure hunts. And he was saying that if you feel like your team's got your back and that you can fail without being blamed and put down, then that's also a part of the trust ingredient.
That is hugely important. When I'm doing a lot of work right now to try to get new in tech early in career people excited about being in tech, but a lot of them can't find companies where they can fail safely without feeling like they have failed with a capital F. And
Right.
having a team that enables you to do that and ask questions, people being afraid to ask questions, especially when they're remote and suffering at home and they've got 1,000 tabs open in Stack Overflow, and they just need someone to sit with them for 20 minutes and walk them through a problem. That fear can be amplified by being stuck at home in your spare room.
Oh, yeah, because if you're just alone in a room by yourself, and you're hitting a wall, I think the best thing you can possibly do is reach out to somebody. And if you don't have that somebody, then I can imagine how painful that must be,
hmm
how
So,
frustrating too.
indeed, indeed. So, as an experiment, before we started recording about 20 minutes ago, you and I tweeted to ask the people, have you or your team done any remote team building exercises to add a little dynamism to our podcast here? And it's been about 27 minutes. We've got 1,200 votes. I guessed that maybe 5 or 10% of teams had done remote morale events, and you guessed it would be much higher. And our current numbers right now say that 43% of our little sample size of 1,200, 43% of folks are doing remote morale events, and about 56% have saying that they've done nothing. So just about half and half. What do you think about those results?
I'm genuinely shocked and surprised at how few teams are doing team building. I guess because I'm steeped in it. I'm surrounded by professional remote facilitators every day who are doing team building exercises and
Mm-hmm.
and things. So I'm really feeling for those people who haven't had any team building activities introduced to their team, because I think that's camaraderie, and that sense of team is done by having experiences together, whether they're in
Mm.
person or remote. So I feel like they're really missing out on an opportunity here for bonding and just getting to know each other in new ways.
Mm. So I'm really surprised because I truly, honestly thought it would be very, very low because I think I am realizing that I'm far more cynical than I realized I was. While you're more plugged in, like you said, you're steeped in this. It sounds like from the replies, and I'm kind of scrolling through the replies here, we have people doing 1 day virtual conferences, playing Among Us, doing quizzes, book club meetings. What are some things that you think are great trust building, remote team building exercises?
Well, I would say there's two aspects to this. So in team building, the first aspect would be to build it into your everyday activities wherever possible. So
Mm,
for example, start your meetings with an icebreaker question. Now they don't have to necessarily be silly questions, right? They could also be, what are you hoping to get out of this meeting, or what are you planning? Why are you here? What expertise are you contributing? But even that can help build a team, because you start to get answers. I mean, I'm all for the silly icebreaker questions, if I'm very honest, but I realize they're not applicable for every situation. But the other thing is that people do are virtual lunches, and they're
hmm
not obligatory. It's like every Wednesday at noon, whoever's around and wants to have lunch, we'll have lunch together, or coffee, or
hmm
adult beverages, whatever people want to have. So just building it into our everyday activity. And then the second aspect of the whole team building is don't leave it to chance, because chances are that it won't happen. So we really need to be deliberate about our team building activities, whatever they are. And, there's tons of stuff. There's video games, there's virtual puzzles, there's getting food delivered. You can send a pizza almost anywhere in the world. So you could even have like a pizza night together where you sent out the pizzas beforehand. There's virtual treasure hunts and all kinds of board games online. You can do almost everything. And I
hmm
think the thing to recognize is, one, I don't like to make things obligatory, just because I feel that, some people
mm
are just not into it. They should never be forced into team building. And then the other thing is, at the moment, given that we're in so many synchronous meetings, we really need to be careful about just adding another meeting to that. I was telling you before we started recording, like, I love the teams that I work with, but the last thing that I want to do on a Friday night after a long week of hard work is sit through a virtual quiz night. For me, it's just like one more meeting, as fun as it might seem. I'd much rather go spend time with my family, or just
hmm
relax and do something outside.
So this is interesting as I scroll through the replies, and this is a great thread. I'll make sure to include the link to this thread in the show notes. Is I'm not seeing any middle ground. People are either like super jazzed we did coffee roulette and Among Us, and we watched Office Space together, and we do watch parties and beer tasting and this and that. And then other ones are saying that the last thing I want to do is hang out with these people for 2 more hours at the end of a long week. Is there any middle ground? Is there a way to get people excited about this? Or do you think that we can read into some of the replies that are saying we don't want to spend time with these people, that maybe there's a larger organizational issue with those companies?
It's really hard to say because there are types of people who actually don't care about team building at all. So there's a scale. Like there's some people where team building is really important and they love it and it's a priority. And there are others that don't value it at all. And I learned this years ago when I interviewed one company where the CEO of the company said, I don't care about teamwork. I don't care what you did on the weekends. I don't care about your barbecue. I'm focused on, did you get the work done?
Yeesh.
And so he runs his company. Yeah, it's weird. However, he has hundreds of developers that work for him because the way he does his company is he puts out work in small chunks. You can take on as much or as little work as you want, and you get paid as soon as you finish it. And there is zero team building, and he has hundreds of people applying for his company, on a regular basis. So what I realized from that interview is it runs the gamut, team building. So I do feel like there is middle ground. I think if we had less meetings, then maybe I'd be more interested in having the quiz night because I'd be less burned out at the end of the week. So I think there is a balance in between, but it's hard to say during a pandemic exactly what's going on, because is it the stress of the pandemic? Have we been in our houses too long? It's hard to say.
I think that it does. There is validity in the sense of it is okay culturally for someone to say, I didn't come here to make friends, right? Like I prioritize family and I prioritize, my own psychology over team building. So I like the idea of making it optional. I respect people saying, yes, Friday at 4:30 is not the time for a team building exercise. So I think that what I'm hearing you say, what I'm hearing the folks in the replies saying is that as long as it's optional, it can't hurt.
For sure not. I think most people would appreciate that the option exists for that. The people that love the team building, they'll want to be there. And the people that can just dip in every once in a while, they will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really appreciate that there are options. And we've tried a couple of things. There's a game called Jackbox, which is kind of like remote Jeopardy or remote trivia games. There's Kahoot. There's Scribble.io. I'll put links to those in the show notes, but they can be all found on the end of that Twitter thread. So do you think that I'm just guessing here, but in 3, 4, 5 years, whenever we're back to normal, do you think you'll go and revise this with the second edition of Work Together Anywhere, where the book gets updated with this worked and this didn't work?
Well, yes. So I hesitate in answering that question. One, because writing a book was the hardest thing I ever did. And I had the hashtag never again for like a year after I finished the book. So like a second edition, I'm still start to
you can
sweat
fool yourself into thinking
it.
that it's just a revision. It's not a big deal. It's just a small revision.
Right, the excuses will come out. But there are a few things that I would definitely change in the next version. And one of those things would be to have much more of a focus on asynchronous communication and what that means. I touch on it in the book, but I didn't highlight it like I would like to now. And I think in the next version, I would focus much more on what asynchronous communication means, and also a lot more about hybrid working. How do we work as a hybrid team? Because that is clearly the future.
Absolutely. When we're all back to work, I guess, when this is all over, maybe it's 30% back in the office, maybe it's 80%. We really don't know. It'll vary by company. It will change how we think about real estate. It'll change how we set up our own personal spaces. I've been a big fan of nesting myself. I use that term a lot, building a nest, because a lot of us have just had our offices at home just kind of happen. There's no intentionality to it. So I've sat down and said, okay, do I need plants? Am I facing the right direction? What's my lighting situation? Like, we all don't have a spare bedroom. We might be in the kitchen on the counter, but are we intentionally with our posture, our chairs, our lighting, our laptops in a place where we can be happy and successful?
Totally. In fact, one of the sections or one part of one of the modules in the workshop is really talking about what does our ideal workspace look like? Because when the pandemic started, indeed, we went to our kitchen tables And my husband always says camping is nice, but not for too long. So, if you're still camped out at your kitchen table, recognize that this pandemic is going to go on for a while, and it's way past time to make yourself comfortable wherever you happen to be, have your nook.
That is a really very, very interesting way to frame it. I had not thought about that, because one of the things that I dislike profoundly about camping, and we do it regularly, we want to make sure that the boys are my boys are well rounded, but it's the impermanence of it. It's the lack of intentionality of it. It's like, we're here only temporarily, but once camping becomes your home, you are going to want to formalize things and make sure that you have the equipment, that you have the mindset, and that you have all of your spaces exactly as you want them to be, so that you can be more happy once permanence is being realized.
Indeed. And sometimes it's just a really small thing that causes a lot of joy. It could be maybe you need a standing desk. When I got my standing desk, it was like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? Like, this is awesome. Or maybe a good speaker system so that you can hear music. Or one of the things that I did over the holidays is I bought myself a flip chart finally. I'm a very tactile person. I like to draw my ideas, and the virtual whiteboards just weren't working for me personally if I'm just working on my own. So, I bought a flip chart, and the joy that brought and how often I use it, it changes everything. So I would just say, if you have the luxury to indulge yourself, this would be a good time to do it.
At the end of the book, you have an extras section. The book, of course, is Work Together Anywhere. It's a very, very comprehensive book, and you include action plans. And I really appreciate this, because a lot of times books just kind of fade away like the mist. And it's like, oh, that was a book I read. But you have action plans for managers, team agreements, really substantive bullet points about what you can do. And you even formalize the idea of a remote team agreement, where it's like, okay, if we're going to do this, let's sit down and let's talk about how we want to communicate, how we feel about email, group chat, phones, texting, putting corporate resources on our mobile phones. You don't say that it should be a certain way, but you do advocate for formalizing the decision.
Totally. So let me just say, let me take a step back to where you said, like, well, the questionnaires and the checklists and things. One of the reasons I did that is because I personally have a tough time taking abstract concepts and then applying them directly to my life. Sometimes I don't understand how that translates. So in this book, what I was trying to do was make it really actionable, so that, yes, there's some abstract things, but if you have a checklist, then you know which concrete steps that you can take tomorrow when you go back to your home office, I guess it is now, when you go back to the bedroom or the kids' room, wherever you are. So indeed, team agreement is one of those action items that I tell people, and I have a template that people can use. And what I like about team agreements is there's all kinds of information that we get when we are working in an office with somebody. From the time you arrive at the office to the time that you've sat down at your desk, you've had 100 micro interactions. You've seen the conference rooms and who's in them, and who's in the coffee room, and who showed up late, and who's tired maybe. You've got all these things that you don't have when you're working remotely. And so a team agreement just helps make those implicit actions more explicit. Also, we all have such different working styles when we're in our own habitats. So, you're able, like, for instance, I am totally not a morning person. And if I had to show up at the office, my preferred time would be around 10:30 or something like that. That's when I would want to roll in. But that is far too late for most normal businesses. It's like you're showing up at lunchtime almost. So when we're working remotely, we sort of all have the opportunity to work when we're most productive, but that might not be conducive to what the team needs. So team agreements can just help formalize what behaviors are normal for our team. So for instance, like, do you need core hours? Are there security protocols that you have to follow? That's a really important one. Do you need a VPN for the information that you need to send? How are you going to communicate with each other? In one of my interviews, I interviewed Beat Buhlmann from Evernote, and he said, you wouldn't email the fire department if your house was on fire, right? It's like the wrong mode of communication for that. And the same, there's a million examples with remote. Like, if there's an emergency on the weekend, do you put it in Slack? Do you call somebody? Like, what's the protocol for these kind of things? So just getting the basics out of the way in terms of formalizing like how we're going to behave together gets rid of a lot of misunderstandings on a team. And don't worry, there's always going to be more. That's just the nature of working with teams. But you want to get the basics out of the way of like, when are you going to be accessible? If it's 2 a.m, like, great, I just need to know that it's 2 a.m. That helps me to plan my day. So, yeah, and then the thing that I find so interesting is you would never get a sports team together and be like, all right, go play. Or like an orchestra, you always tune and practice, but we don't seem to do that with our teams. With our teams, we kind of we tend to assemble and just go. And it's rare that we take a step back to really talk about, well, how are we going to go? How are we going to run that marathon together?
Fantastic. All of these insights and far more are in the book Work Together Anywhere. You can start at LisetteSutherland.com. I will include a link in the show notes, and you can also have Lisette come and speak at your company, which is pretty cool. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Scott. It's been an honor.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.